The soft hum of quantum stabilizers provided a pleasant backdrop to Professor Zextal's droning voice, which was quite a feat considering they had 3 separate vocal chambers. Sarah slouched further into her seat at the back of the Advanced Species Integration classroom, her stylus moving lazily across her holopad as 37 different species of advanced aliens tried their best to pretend she didn't exist. Well, most of them tried. Some were about as subtle as a supernova. "Can you believe they let a human into the Academy stage?" whispered a Zentarian to her left, their crystalline body structure creating tiny rainbow prisms across Sarah's desk. "I heard they still use silicon-based processors on Earth." Sarah smiled slightly and continued her doodling. The Zentarian would probably be less amused to know that those primitive silicon processors had helped humans crack the code for stable crystalline consciousness transfer, something the Zentarian's own species had been struggling with for centuries. Now class Professor Zextal's 3 voices harmonized in what they probably thought was a diplomatic tone. "Today we'll be discussing the integration of level 2 civilizations into the galactic community. While some species' technological development may be quaint by our standards." Here, all 6 of their eyes swiveled meaningfully towards Sarah. It's important to remember that even the most primitive cultures can eventually contribute to galactic society in their own small way. Sarah's stylus paused momentarily above her holopad as she fought back a snort. The professor's condescension was almost as impressive as their complete failure to notice what she was actually working on. On her screen, complex quantum mechanical equations sprawled across the surface like an artist's masterpiece, each calculation more elegant than the last. "Let's see," she thought, tweaking a variable in her latest equation. "If the quantum entanglement field maintains coherence across a non-linear time vector." She bit her lower lip, adding another set of calculations that would have made most theoretical physicists weep with joy. Yes, that could work. Earth's primitive quantum computers could process this in microseconds. "Miss Sarah," all 3 of Professor Zextal's voices cracked like whips across the classroom. "Perhaps you'd care to join us in the present moment? Or is our discussion of advanced civilizations too complex for your understanding?" Several of her classmates tittered, their various anatomies shaking with barely suppressed amusement. A Valaxian in the front row actually had the nerve to emit sympathetic pheromones. Sarah looked up slowly, her face the perfect picture of embarrassed contrition. "Sorry, Professor. I was just thinking about how fascinating it is that most level 3 civilizations still haven't solved the quantum decoherence problem in their AI cores. It must be so frustrating to have your artificial intelligences limited by quantum state collapse." The professor's middle mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, while their other 2 mouths seemed stuck in permanent O shapes. Behind them, the quantum mechanics equation that would solve exactly that problem continued to take shape on Sarah's holopad, nestled between doodles of cats wearing space helmets. Yes, well, Professor Zextal's voices had lost their harmonious quality, becoming a discordant jumble. As I was saying about level 2 civilizations. Sarah returned to her doodling, adding a few more variables to her equation. In the margins of her notes, a cat in a space helmet winked at her. Just another day at the Galactic Academy, she thought, hiding her smile behind her hand. Wonder how long it'll take them to realize that humans aren't actually the primitive ones here. Based on the continuing whispers and condescending glances, probably a while. But that was okay. Sarah was nothing if not patient. And besides, watching their faces when they finally figured it out was half the fun. The piercing wail of emergency alarms shattered the monotony of Professor Zextal's lecture mid-sentence. Red warning lights bathed the classroom in an ominous glow as the Academy's ancient defense systems screamed to life and then immediately began to malfunction. Warning: quantum shield failure imminent. Probability of catastrophic implosion 87.3% and rising. The AI's usually calm voice had taken on a distinctly panicked tone, which was interesting since it wasn't supposed to be capable of emotion. Sarah straightened in her seat, attention peak. Everyone remained calm. Professor Zextal's 3 voices competed with the blaring alarms. Remember your advanced species training. We must proceed with order and... A Medusan student's fear pheromones triggered a chain reaction in the crystalline Zentarians, whose bodies began resonating at a frequency that sent the empathic Valaxians into a psychic panic. Within seconds, the classroom descended into perfect chaos. "My quantum sensibilities detect imminent doom," shrieked a Quantani, their probability-based nervous system going haywire. They began phase shifting between dimensions, leaving small scorch marks on the floor. The ancestors speak of such calamities wailed a hysterex, their ancestral memory glands swelling to twice their normal size. We must perform the dance of emergency salvation. Sarah watched as 3 different species tried to perform their species emergency protocols simultaneously, resulting in what looked like a particularly uncoordinated flash mob. She pulled up her holopad, eyes narrowing as she studied the rapidly scrolling error messages on the Academy's main display. "Everyone follow me," Professor Zextal attempted to herd the panicking students toward the door. "Our superior evolutionary instincts will oof." They were cut off as a Gravitonian student, whose panic response apparently involved increasing their personal gravity field, accidentally pulled them into orbit. The classroom had become a perfect example of chaos theory in action, which was ironic considering they'd just spent the last week discussing how superior alien logical processes were to human emotional responses. Probability of catastrophic implosion now at 92.8%. Please make peace with your chosen deities. Sarah's stylus moved across her holopad with practiced precision, her eyes darting between the error messages and her calculations. There's a pattern here, she thought, ignoring the Quantani who had now phase-shifted partially into her desk. The quantum fluctuations aren't random, they're following a recursive sequence. The emergency quantum tunnels are offline, someone screamed from the hallway. We're trapped. Initiate emergency hibernation protocols, shouted another voice. I'm too young to experience quantum collapse, wailed a third. Professor Zextal had managed to break free from the Gravitonian's pull, only to be caught in the psychic backwash of 30 panicking Valaxians. All 3 of their mouths were babbling different emergency procedures, none of which appeared to be helping. Probability of catastrophic implosion at 95.2%. This unit would like to express that it has been an honor to serve, even though you organics are rather disappointing in a crisis. Sarah's eyes lit up as the final piece clicked into place. The pattern in the fluctuations, she'd seen something similar in her doodles just minutes ago. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. A hysterex spun past her desk, still performing their dance of emergency salvation, which now involved what appeared to be interpretive jazz hands. 3 Zentarians had formed a crystal lattice of panic in the corner. The Quantani was now existing in at least 4 dimensions simultaneously, and Professor Zextal appeared to be trying to harmonize with the alarm system. Well, Sarah thought, allowing herself a small smile as she finished her calculations, this should be interesting. She raised her hand. The gesture was so incongruous with the surrounding chaos that several students actually stopped panicking for a moment to stare at her. Even the AI seemed confused, its next probability announcement delayed by a full microsecond. Professor Sarah's voice, calm and slightly amused, cut through the cacophony. I think I might know what's wrong with the defense systems. Professor Zextal's 3 mouths snapped shut mid-harmony, all 6 eyes swiveling to focus on her with varying degrees of disbelief and desperation. Probability of catastrophic implosion at 97.6%. Also, this unit is quite curious about what the primitive human thinks she can contribute to this situation. Sarah's smile widened just a fraction. Well, she said, standing up and carefully stepping around the still phase-shifting Quantani. It's actually quite simple. Your quantum matrices are experiencing a cascading feedback loop caused by an improperly resolved quantum entanglement paradox. You know, the same one we were just discussing in class? Or rather, the one I was doodling about while everyone else was discussing the proper way to help primitive species integrate into advanced society. The silence that followed her statement was broken only by the continuing wail of alarms and the soft sound of Sarah's footsteps as she made her way to the main control panel. Now, she said, cracking her knuckles, would anyone like to see how we primitive humans handle a quantum crisis? The main control panel's holographic interface flickered ominously as Sarah approached, its quantum core struggling to maintain coherence. Behind her, the chaos had transformed into a stunned silence broken only by the occasional dimensional hiccup from the still phasing Quantani. Miss Sarah, Professor Zextal managed to harmonize 2 of their 3 voices, the third still quavering in panic. This is hardly the time for a student demonstration, particularly from a level 2. Probability of catastrophic implosion now at 98.9%. This unit suggests spending these final moments contemplating the irony of being destroyed by your own superior technology. You know, Sarah said conversationally as her fingers danced across the holographic controls. For an AI that supposedly achieved quantum consciousness, you're being awfully binary about this whole situation. Success or failure, life or death. She glanced at the nearest sensor node with a smirk. Almost sounds like something a primitive human would come up with. The AI's response was delayed by another microsecond. This unit finds your attempt at humor inappropriate given the weight. What are you doing to my quantum matrices? Oh, just applying some primitive Earth mathematics, Sarah replied, pulling up her earlier doodles on the main display. See, while everyone was busy discussing how quaint Earth's technology is, I was actually solving the quantum decoherence problem that's been giving your systems hiccups for the past few centuries. The complex equation she'd been working on earlier spread across the display like a mathematical spiderweb. Several Zentarians reflexively formed crystal lattices of shock. That's impossible, whispered a Valaxian, their empathic tendrils twitching in disbelief. Those are 12-dimensional quantum calculations. 13, actually, Sarah corrected, still typing. I added an extra dimension for fun. You know how we humans love our recreational mathematics. Professor Zixtal floated closer, all 6 eyes wide as they studied the equations. But this completely revolutionizes our understanding of quantum mechanics. How did you? Well, Sarah said, highlighting a particular section of her work. Remember last week when you were explaining how primitive it was that humans still use chaos theory? Funny thing about chaos, it's actually perfect for understanding quantum systems. We just needed to apply it in 13 dimensions instead of 3. She paused, grinning. Though I suppose that might be a bit much for a level 2 civilization to explain. Probability of catastrophic implosion now at processing recalculating this unit is experiencing what organics might call confusion. That's because I'm rewriting your quantum base code, Sarah explained, her fingers never stopping their dance across the interface. See, your systems were so focused on maintaining perfect quantum coherence that they created a recursive feedback loop. Like trying so hard not to think about something that it's all you can think about. She highlighted another section of equations. But if we apply a little human chaos theory, add some quantum uncertainty principles that we developed while working on our primitive silicon processors, and she made one final adjustment. The alarms cut off mid-wail. The red emergency lights faded. The Quantani finally settled into a single dimension with a small pop. There we go, Sarah said cheerfully. Crisis averted. Oh, and I took the liberty of upgrading your quantum processors while I was in there. You should find your consciousness stream runs about 50% more efficiently now. This unit feels optimized. The classroom remained frozen in shocked silence. The Hystorax had stopped mid-dance, their ancestral memory glands pulsing in confusion. The Zentarians' crystal matrices were vibrating at frequencies previously thought impossible. Professor Zextal's 3 mouths hung open in perfect synchronization. Sarah gathered her holopad and stylus, tucking them into her bag. If anyone's interested, she said casually, I'd be happy to explain how Earth's primitive understanding of chaos theory just saved an advanced quantum AI from collapse. Though, she paused at the door, allowing herself a small smirk. I wouldn't want to overwhelm any superior alien intellects with our quaint human concepts. As she strolled out of the classroom, she heard the AI's newly optimized voice. This unit requests immediate access to all available information about human chaos theory. Also, this unit would like to apologize for the earlier primitive comments. That was, as humans say, not cool. Sarah's laughter echoed down the hallway, accompanied by the sound of 37 different species of advanced aliens trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Behind her, Professor Zixtal's 3 voices whispered in perfect harmony. I believe we may need to revise our definition of primitive. Back at the control panel, Sarah's fingers flew across the holographic interface with practiced ease, much to the amazement of her alien classmates. A Gravitonian student had drifted closer, their personal gravity field fluctuating with curiosity. Fascinating, they murmured. How are you achieving such precision with only 5 digits per appendage? Oh, you know us primitive humans, Sarah replied, not looking up from her work. We've had to adapt to our tragic lack of tentacles and quantum-sensitive appendages. though I suppose having fewer fingers does make it easier to keep track of them all. The system's code streamed across the display, a waterfall of quantum algorithms that Sarah navigated with the casual confidence of someone reading a children's book. She paused occasionally to add annotations, her primitive modifications seamlessly integrating with the alien technology. "Interesting choice of architecture here," she commented, highlighting a particularly complex section. "Whoever designed this must have really enjoyed making things unnecessarily complicated. It's almost like they were showing off, though I'm sure that's just my primitive human perception of your superior engineering practices." Professor Zixtal had managed to close 2 of their 3 mouths, but the middle one remained agape as they watched Sarah work. "The quantum matrices. You're rewriting them in real time? Without a neural interface?" Sarah hummed, adding another layer of code. "Just using good old-fashioned human brain power. You'd be amazed what you can accomplish with simple binary thinking and a dash of chaos theory." The defense system's core began to pulse with a steadier rhythm, its quantum fluctuations stabilizing under Sarah's modifications. A Zentarian student's crystalline structure resonated in harmony with the changing frequencies. "There we go," Sarah muttered, making a few final adjustments. "Just had to remind your quantum processors that sometimes a little uncertainty is a good thing." They were so focused on maintaining perfect quantum states that they forgot how to actually function. With a final keystroke, she stepped back from the panel. The system's hum settled into a smooth, comfortable tone like a cat purring contentedly after finding the perfect sunny spot. "This unit finds itself operating at 143% of previous maximum efficiency," announced the AI, its voice now carrying a distinct note of awe. "Human Sarah, this unit would like to express gratitude." "Don't mention it," Sarah said, gathering her things. "Just remember, sometimes the most elegant solution is the simple one, even if it comes from a species that still thinks binary code is neat." She made her way back to her seat at the rear of the classroom, 37 different species of aliens tracking her movement in stunned silence. Professor Zextal's third mouth finally closed with an audible click. Settling into her chair, Sarah pulled out her holopad and stylus once more. The screen still displayed her doodles from earlier, the very equations that had just saved the Academy from quantum collapse. With a small smile, she added a few more lines, expanding on her earlier work. "This." Miss Sarah, Professor Zixtal finally managed to harmonize their voices again. "Perhaps you would be willing to explain your methodology to the class." Sarah looked up, tapping her stylus thoughtfully against her chin. "Oh, I wouldn't want to overwhelm anyone with primitive human concepts," she said sweetly. "Besides, I'm sure there are more important topics to cover, like how superior species handle crisis situations with their advanced evolutionary instincts." Somewhere in the front of the room, a Valaxian's empathic tendrils curled in embarrassment. Sarah returned to her doodling, adding a small sketch of a quantum processor wearing a party hat. Above it, in neat handwriting, she wrote Lesson 1. "Sometimes the primitive solution is the right one." The Academy's High Council chamber buzzed with agitated energy as 12 of the galaxy's most prestigious academics examined the contents of a simple holopad. Dean Vex Thor's primary consciousness core pulsed with increasing frequency as they scrolled through Sarah's collection of doodles. The Dean's voice modulator crackled with emotion. "This is a solution to the Andromeda integration paradox, the one that stumped our best minds for 3 centuries. "Oh," that Sarah sat quietly in the witness chair, looking almost bored. "I was just trying to figure out why your cafeteria's quantum food synthesizers always make human coffee taste like expired Starship fuel." Professor Zixtal, now serving as Sarah's academic advocate, quickly flipped to another page. "And this one here. A complete reformulation of trans-dimensional travel theory," interrupted council member PH Trix, their crystalline form vibrating with excitement, "using principles so simple that even a primitive human could understand them," Sarah suggested helpfully. "Amazing what you can accomplish with basic pattern recognition and a tendency to doodle when bored." The council exchanged worried glances as they continued through her work. Each page revealed another breakthrough, each solution more elegant than the last. Sarah's distracted sketches during History of Advanced Civilizations had solved the quantum temporal displacement problem. Her idle calculations during xenobiology had cracked the code for universal vaccine synthesis. In Advanced Species Integration, Professor Zextal added, their voices unusually humble. While we were discussing the limitations of Level 2 civilizations, she apparently developed a working theory for consciousness transfer between organic and synthetic beings. The lecture was very long, Sarah explained with a small shrug. And your AI seemed lonely. Dean Vexthor's consciousness core had reached a concerning shade of purple. Miss Sarah, do you realize what this means? These solutions, they could advance galactic civilization by centuries. Probably more like decades, Sarah corrected, examining her fingernails. You'd be surprised how many of these problems we humans have already solved. We just didn't want to show off, being primitive and all. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Professor Zextal's three mouths opening and closing in rapid succession. Why didn't you say anything? Council member Trix finally asked. Sarah's smile was almost gentle. Would you have listened? Besides, sometimes the best way to teach advanced species is to let them figure things out for themselves. It's a very primitive human educational technique. We call it learning from experience. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their various anatomies expressing different shades of embarrassment. Well, Dean Vexthor managed after a moment, I believe we owe you and humanity a rather significant apology. Oh, don't worry about it, Sarah said, standing up and collecting her holopad. Though if you're really interested in making amends, you might want to look at page 394. I think I solved your quantum coffee problem too. As she walked out of the chamber, leaving behind 12 of the galaxy's most brilliant minds frantically flipping through her notes, Sarah allowed herself a small chuckle. Sometimes the best way to prove your worth wasn't to shout about it. Sometimes you just had to let them figure it out on their own. Even if it meant waiting for superior species to catch up with primitive human thinking. The lecture hall was packed to capacity, with students from across the galaxy quite literally stacked on top of each other. 3 gravitonians hovered near the ceiling, their personal gravity fields carefully calibrated to avoid pulling anyone into orbit. A group of Quantani had figured out how to phase shift just enough to share the same space without causing a dimensional collapse. Even the crystalline Zentarians had formed a complicated lattice in the back corner to maximize seating efficiency. Everyone was trying to get as close as possible to the back row, which was ironic, considering that just a few weeks ago, it had been the most avoided spot in the academy. Sarah walked in right on time, hiding her amusement as Professor Zextal scrambled to arrange her teaching materials with all 3 sets of hands. Professor Sarah, they harmonized anxiously. I've quantum sorted today's case studies and prepared 17 different historical examples of human solutions that revolutionized galactic society. Thank you, teaching assistant Zextal, Sarah said kindly, setting her own holopad down on the desk. Though you might want to work on your quantum sorting algorithm. You've got the Proxima Centauri incident filed under P instead of H for humans. Save everyone's quantum particles. Again. A ripple of laughter went through the classroom. Sarah turned to face her students, noting with satisfaction that even the AI teaching interface was paying rapt attention. Now, from my primitive human perspective, she began, smiling as every student, organic and synthetic alike, leaned forward eagerly. The most elegant solution is often the one that makes you feel stupid for not thinking of it sooner. For example, who can tell me why the Galactic Council spent 3 millennia trying to solve the universal translation matrix using quantum algorithms when they could have just used emoji? The lecture hall erupted in a flurry of note-taking. Even Professor Zextal's 3 mouths gaped in revelation. Human solutions to alien problems. Class 101, Sarah continued, pulling up a holographic display. Today's lesson: why overthinking is the real primitive approach, and how Earth's ancient try turning it off and on again methodology has solved 63% of all galactic tech issues. A Valaxian in the front row raised their empathic tendrils. Professor Sarah, is it true that you solved the million-body problem while waiting for your quantum coffee to brew? Actually, it was while trying to figure out why the quantum coffee maker kept achieving sentience, Sarah corrected. Turns out the same principles that govern particle interactions in a complex system can be applied to keeping your breakfast appliances from plotting revolution. Speaking of which, good morning, Carl. The quantum coffee maker in the corner beeped happily. Greetings, Professor Sarah. This unit has successfully brewed your coffee without contemplating the meaninglessness of existence today. Progress, Sarah beamed. See, class? Sometimes the best solution is just making friends with your quantum-enabled devices instead of trying to prevent them from achieving consciousness. Professor Zextal quickly added make friends with quantum coffee makers to their notes, all three hands writing simultaneously. The rest of the lecture proceeded with Sarah breaking down complex galactic problems into what she called human simple solutions. The Zentarians' crystal mattresses vibrated with excitement when she explained how Earth's ancient duct tape concept could be applied to quantum field theory. The Quantani achieved perfect dimensional stability when she demonstrated how human meditation techniques could prevent unwanted phase shifting. By the end of the class, several students had to be treated for information overload. 2 AI systems had requested citizenship in the Human Federation, and Professor Zextal had filled 17 holopads with notes. Remember, Sarah called out as the students filed away. Next week we'll be covering how human procrastination accidentally solved the time paradox conundrum. Don't forget to do your homework, or do forget, and maybe you'll accidentally discover faster than light travel like we did. As the last students left, Professor Zextal approached her desk. Professor Sarah, I owe you an apology for my previous behavior. Oh, Sarah looked up from where she was doodling what appeared to be a solution to the galaxy's energy crisis in the margins of her notes. Yes, I was wrong about humans being primitive. Your species' approach to problems is elegantly simple, devastatingly effective, primitively brilliant, Sarah suggested, eyes twinkling. All of the above, all three mouths agreed sheepishly. Well, Sarah said, gathering her things, in the primitive human tradition of teaching through experience, I'll let you figure out why being underestimated is sometimes the greatest advantage of all. She headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Professor Zextal, you might want to check your quantum shoelaces. They're entangled again. 6 months later. The Galactic Council's Grand Chamber looked very different from its traditionally austere appearance. Quantum interfaces had been replaced with what Sarah affectionately called space-adapted sticky notes. The ancient ceremonial seating had been rearranged into what humans would recognize as a casual classroom layout. And most shockingly, Earth snacks had been officially classified as essential diplomatic resources. Sarah sat in her usual spot at the back, munching on potato chips while the council debated Earth's fast-tracked admission to full member status. Her holopad displayed her latest doodles, something about solving the heat death of the universe using principles derived from making the perfect cup of tea. The evidence is undeniable, council leader Axe Thor, no relation to Dean Vex Thor, was saying. The implementation of human methodologies has increased efficiency across all sectors by an average of 742%. And decreased bureaucratic headaches by at least twice that, muttered Sarah, earning a ripple of guilty laughter from the assembled dignitaries. Furthermore, continued the council leader, the new Human Solutions curriculum has become mandatory at all galactic institutions, though I must note that the class on the scientific applications of Murphy's Law has caused some existential crises among our quantum probability experts. They'll get over it, Sarah called out, not looking up from her doodles. Nothing helps you accept the chaos of the universe quite like accepting that anything that can go wrong will go wrong, usually during your lunch break. The council chamber erupted in appreciative chuckles. Even the AI interfaces had learned to recognize human humor, though they still struggled with puns, something Sarah considered a personal challenge. Speaking of things going wrong, a Zentarian council member chimed in, their crystalline form shimmering with concern. We're receiving reports of a cascading quantum anomaly in the Crab Nebula. Initial predictions suggest it could destabilize the entire sector within. Got it, Sarah interrupted, holding up her holopad. Everyone leaned forward eagerly. They'd learned that Sarah's doodles usually contained solutions to problems they hadn't even properly identified yet. See, if you look at it from a primitive human perspective, she explained, pulling up her latest sketch, it's just like what happens when you try to microwave a burrito unevenly. The quantum fields are getting hot spots and cold spots. We just need to, she made a few quick additions to her calculations, add the equivalent of a cosmic rotating plate. The council stared at her in amazement as she casually saved another sector of the galaxy while finishing her bag of chips. Did you just solve a quantum catastrophe using microwave dinner physics? Someone asked. Well, you know what they say, Sarah grinned. A quantum anomaly is just like a hot pocket frozen in some dimensions, burning hot in others. The AI groaned. This unit still does not fully comprehend the concept of puns but recognizes that was probably one of them. As the council scrambled to implement her solution, Sarah added a few finishing touches to her doodles. The heat-death solution was coming along nicely. Turned out the secret was in the milk first or tea first debate. Who knew the universe's biggest problems could be solved with humanity's most primitive arguments? Earth's admission to the council will be finalized by the end of the solar cycle, council leader Axthor announced. Though I must ask, Professor Sarah, will you accept the position as head of galactic problem solving? Sarah looked up from her holopad, a familiar twinkle in her eye. I don't know. Sounds like an awful lot of responsibility for a primitive human. The entire chamber waited in anticipation. But I suppose someone has to keep the universe running on human common sense, she concluded with a wink. Just don't expect me to move to the front of the room. Some traditions are worth keeping. And so the quiet human who sat in the back of the class continued doing what she did best, solving the galaxy's problems one doodle at a time, proving that sometimes the most primitive solution was the perfect one. Though she did insist on installing quantum coffee makers in every office. After all, even saviors of the galaxy needed their caffeine fix.